Welcome back to our topics lesson, Year 2. I hope you are all very well. This is Miss Louise, and our topic today is famous people, and we'll be looking at Roald Dahl again. I hope that many of you had time to check out some of his work. Let's look at some fun facts about Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl wrote many of his stories in a little shed at the bottom of his garden. He called it his writing hut. We know from our previous lesson that Roald Dahl was in the RAF. He was a fighter pilot in World War II. In 1940, while flying over Libya, Dahl crash-landed in the desert and survived, all because he'd been given the wrong directions. Roald Dahl wrote for around 4 hours every single day, from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m, and then back at 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. Roald Dahl never learned how to type. Instead, he preferred to do all his writings in an old red notebooks in pencil. Dahl invented over 250 new words. There's even an official Oxford Roald Dahl dictionary to help you tell your snozcumbers from your snozberries. Many of Roald Dahl's characters were based on people he had met in real life. For example, the grandmother in The Witches is based on his own mother, while the little girl in the BFG was named after his granddaughter, Sophie. As we saw in our last lesson, Roald Dahl was born in Wales, but both his parents were Norwegian. He could speak both English and Norwegian, and was named after the famous Norwegian polar explorer Roald Amundsen. Now, I want to take a look at my favourite Roald Dahl story today, The Witches. Now let's take a look at a few of the characters. Our main character, labelled as the boy, is a little boy called Luke. We see his grandmother, and of course the Grand High Witch, Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins, the mother and father of Bruno Jenkins. And then we have Mr. Stringer, who is a hotel owner. At the beginning of our story, Luke loses both his parents and moves in with his grandmother. His grandmother knows all about witches, and she had a very close encounter with one as a child. Luke's grandmother, who was Norwegian, just like Dahl's own mother, would sit and tell Luke stories about witches. Luke's grandmother told him how to recognize a witch. First, they have claws which they hide under their gloves, very peculiar noses, bold heads, and they have wig rash. They always wear wigs, sinister handbags, square feet with no toes, and blue spit. Luke and his grandmother decide to take a vacation to the seaside. They stay in a hotel where they meet Mr. Stringer, who is the owner. There he would meet a little boy called Bruno Jenkins, and of course Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins, his parents. He would later meet the Grand High Witch, the witch who was in charge of all of the witches. The witches were staying at the hotel too. Apparently, they all had a big meeting for a charity to help poor children. But really, they were planning about how to rid the whole of the UK of children. They had devised a formula, so like a medicine, that would turn every child into a mouse. And this formula would go in all the chocolate bars. Sadly, Bruno was the first to be experimented on, followed by Luke. While Luke was a mouse, he managed to get hold of the formula from the Grand High Witch's room and ended up putting it in the soup that all the witches would eat, turning them all into mice. While the movie shows Luke being turned back into a human, the book sadly sees him stay as a mouse. This was something that Roald Dahl did not like about the movie. Now let's take a look at some of Roald Dahl's poetry. As I said in our last lesson, Dahl was also a poet. Revolting Rhymes is a collection of poems. He gives a reinterpretation of 6 well-known fairy tales with surprise endings in place of the traditional happily ever after ones. So let's start with Goldilocks and the 3 Bears. Then Goldilocks, that little toad, that nosy, thieving little louse, comes sneaking into your empty house. She looks around, she quickly notes the bowl's brimful of porridge oats, and while she's standing still on her feet, she grabs a spoon and starts to eat. I say again, how would you feel if you had made that lovely meal? Now we can guess what's happened to Goldilocks by looking at the picture. Now let's have a look at the 3 little pigs. A short while later through the woods came striding brave Miss Riding Hood. The wolf stood there, his eyes ablaze, and yellowish like mayonnaise. His teeth were sharp, his gums were raw, and spit was dripping from his jaw. Once more the maiden's eyelids flickered. She drew the pistol from her knickers. Once more she hit the vital spot, and killed him with a single shot. Pig, peeping through the window, stood and yelled, "Well done, Miss Riding Hood!" As we can see, a little bit different from the traditional story of the 3 little pigs. Now we're going to end with a few questions. So the first question: who was the grandmother from the witches based upon? If you said his mother, you are correct. Can anybody remember the name of the little boy in The Witches? If you said Luke, absolutely fantastic. What did the witches want to turn every child into? That's correct, mice. What was the book which had the collection of poems written by Roald Dahl? If you said Revolting Rhymes, excellent. Okay, last question. What 2 languages could Roald Dahl speak? If you said Norwegian and English, correct. Now let's finish with a quote by Roald Dahl, which I hope you'll all use. If you have good thoughts, they will shine out of your face like sunbeams, and you will always look lovely. Thank you, Year 2, and please take care, and I will see you soon. Goodbye.